Now I'm going to welcome our speakers for the second plenary session. I welcome Mr. R. Mukundan, Chairman, CII National Committee on Environment and Managing Director and CEO, Tata Chemicals Limited. A very warm welcome to Mr. R. Mukundan. I welcome Ms. Priya Subbaraman, Chief Regulatory Officer, National Stock Exchange of India. On behalf of CII, I welcome Ms. Oksana Romanchuk, Member ESG in Business Action Council and Managing Director, Indria CSR Consultancy. I welcome Mr. Jayant Murthy, Joint MD, Kaizen Institute. I also welcome Mr. S. Anjani Kumar, Partner, Deloitte India. Welcome all of you, please.
So, good afternoon, and I'm aware we're running about 7 minutes late, but I assure you, you will have your lunch on time. So, we will make up for that lost time, and I have already told the team I'm not going to speak much. As is usual, CI has given me a 7-page talking point, which I will not talk through and bore you with. Let me just take a minute to introduce our esteemed panelists, and you already have met with Priya Subbaraman, I think in the morning in the first session. She's the Chief Regulatory Officer of National Stock Exchange. It is the world's largest derivative exchange, and she's part of the CII Corporate Governance Council and member of several various bodies which play a key role in regulatory framework within India. Also, a warm welcome to Oksana Romanchuk. She is she believes entrepreneurship is a key driver of economic growth, and for more than 10 years, she has implemented programs for development of small, medium-sized business in Russia, UK, and MENA region, and she's presently managing partner of the consultancy. The key point about Oksana and the next speaker, Jayant, they're going to speak to us from the SME sector point of view, and there are very interesting perspectives which we will go through, because what you hear in conferences like this is the voice of the large companies and where things get done in any case, but I think the struggle is for the medium and small companies. I take this opportunity also to welcome Jayant Murthy, the Joint Managing Director of Kaizen Institute. He has over 24 years focused on training and consulting improvement at the real ground level in terms of all the indices, in terms of Kaizen, lean deployment, and lastly, not the least, Anjani Kumar. He is the practice head of Monitor Deloitte in India, and has worked with many of us, including my company, in terms of many new product launches and done a lot of transformative initiatives for the client. And he's going to speak about his skills are in strategy formulation, business planning, and market entry. Broadly, I think while we all speak about the need for sustainability, the business of business is no longer usual. We have to move to beyond usual. Really, the driver for that shift is on 3 broad verticals, as we call it: environment, social, and governance. But the broad theme which sort of holds it all together is governance. If governance is of a high order, then rest of the others get done. And a lot of what you heard in the morning, 2 sessions, were all around how do we get the governance going. And one critical feature of this whole piece about why businesses have transformed, and this has been changing, and many Indian businesses have actually followed this from decades. And I come from a group which always thought it was pretty important to be socially relevant, because our founder said that the very purpose of a business is the society, is the community. Without community, you can't have business. And that sort of brought in a lot of other elements, which is around what I would call the social environment, the impact which we are having as key elements. And going forward, I think the shift we are seeing is that these are all getting more into what we call as the way the financial results were measured, and you were driving towards an outcome. These are all going to get measured, and we are going to drive towards outcome in many different ways. And the key issue for all of us as we move along in this journey is going to be around the piece, how do we sort of drive this whole change towards sustainability, and what role do we have as corporates in ensuring that our sustainability reporting, sustainability disclosures, our action plans all align in one direction to finally create value for shareholders. Uh, with these remarks, I'd like to sort of start actually with Anjani Kumar. Much to your surprise, you thought you would come in last, but I think I decided to change that. And maybe your perspectives on the whole space of governance and ESG, and where does the whole thing lie? And over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mukundan, and a very good afternoon to the audience. I think, as we all know, we as corporates have to play a very critical and integral role in helping mitigate climate change as well as moving towards net zero. From a governance perspective, as we look at ESG, governance is both a vertical and a horizontal. It's a vertical from our environment, social, and governance, but it's also underpinning what we do on the environment and the social side. So as we think about the role of corporates and as we think about the role of governance, I think there are, at least, as we've looked at working with multiple clients, and we as Deloitte ourselves have taken our net zero journey where we're looking at 2030 when we'll be net zero. I think there's 6 considerations that each of the corporates have to take into account. I think first and possibly the most critical is embedding sustainability into their strategy. Sustainability cannot be a tick, or it cannot be something that you do over and above your strategy. It has to be critical and embedded in your strategy. So as organizations think about their goals and aspirations, their way to play choices, their how to win, their operating model, each of those elements should have elements of E, S, and G embedded in it. And that's not enough. What is also critical is converting those into an implementation plan that is measurable and effective. So for example, if there are certain goals that have been set, can we break down those goals into annual targets? Can we then break it down into quarterly KPIs for which there are specific champions and people who are responsible? So I think that's step one. I think the second element for each of the corporates is how should they think about taking certain ambitious targets in terms of their carbon emission reductions. I think it's not enough to have it on their website. It's not enough to make some claims, or it's not enough to have a really far out year when they want to get to a net zero target. So thinking about their value chain, their suppliers, their customers, what's the ambitious target that they can take in terms of their net zero commitments? I think the third key element there is transparency. So once people have embedded ESG into their strategy, once they have started to take specific targets, how transparent are they about disclosing the progress on each of the metrics to their stakeholders, whether it's their employees, whether it's their customers, whether it's their vendors. So transparency becomes extremely critical. I think the fourth element, given the task at hand and how difficult it is, the element of collaboration with all your stakeholders and even at times with your competitors becomes critical for you to be more sustainable. You know, in our country, we've looked at how some of the tower companies in the past, being competitors, have collaborated, but that's led to significant reduction in power consumption, land usage. So again, examples of how can you collaborate with people across your value chain, including competitors, if needed at times, to make sure you are on the right path to get to your carbon reduction emission targets. I think the fifth element is thinking about innovation and technology. I think now with Industry 4.0, we do have the technology to measure so many elements of our emissions, so many elements of ESG, and what gets measured gets action. So how do we look at some of the intelligent sensors? How do we look at some of the technologies like cloud, AI, as well as Bitcoins to make sure that we are transparently measuring and looking at newer technologies to make sure that we are on the right path. And I think finally, and equally importantly, is how do we engage with all our stakeholders? So, you know, as management, as board, it's not enough for us to only think about we will do it on our own. So, you know, whether it's our employees, whether it's our bankers, whether it's investors, whether it's vendors, customers. So engaging each one of them in our journey as we think about mitigating the risks of climate change as well as getting to net zero becomes clearly critical. So I think from a corporate perspective, these are in some senses, 6 parameters and factors that we should think about in a holistic manner, not individually, but holistically together, which will help us in the journey.
Thank you. I really like the concept which you said, governance, a horizontal and a vertical, and then the key points of your theme were, well, is it in strategy? What's your ambition? How are you disclosing so that you're transparent and you make yourself accountable? Then are you collaborating? Are you thinking of new ideas? And finally, mainly employees, but all the stakeholders, are you engaging them? I think that sort of gives a broad framework, and thanks a lot for putting it all together. So I think my next point would be mainly around then, if all this is something which we have to do, what are the perspectives, Priya, from your context in terms of the regulatory environment? Because many times we feel that while what Anjanini said is nice and good, companies start to move only when there is a framework to do it, right? Otherwise, it's some people do it without being pushed. A lot of people need that push and reason to do. So maybe it's your thoughts on that.
So there are two parts. This is a very interesting photograph which I wanted to show everybody, but this is not necessarily what I'm going to speak now. But there are two parts of this. There is this push factor which can come in from the regulators. Obviously, there's the law, and then people need to comply with the law, and then the frontline regulators like us actually set out what you can or can't do and what are the nitty-gritty rules. But there is also the aspect of investors, right? So when we think about, I looked at some of the metrics around sustainability, and what we are increasingly finding is that investors are pushing, there are more investors in sustainability funds. Investors are pushing companies to actually go green, because more dollars are going into green bonds, blue bonds, whole lot of social mixed sustainability bonds and so on. And these metrics are not gradual. So if you look at 2020 to 21, you will see a 60% jump in sustainability related AUMs. You will see a 50% jump in something else. So these are not gradual. These are not 3, 4, 5% changes. It's significant changes, and therefore, whether or not the regulation actually tells you move 3 feet this side and take 2 steps forward, the investors are already doing that. The investors are, and companies will obviously make sure that their investors are happy, because that's really the only way to run your business on a longer term. We are also seeing that in more than one situation. So one is the investors' new sustainability funds and so on. We are also seeing market capitalization go up dramatically if you are actually taking out a division and selling it off. So one would, traditional wisdom would tell you that you've sold off your revenues because you've taken away one division. You may or may not have got enough in terms of the consideration for that. But suddenly your market cap has gone up twice, because you've taken away a business which is considered as polluting or not part of the sustainable. So that is something which increasingly is becoming more and more important for the valuation people. We are seeing this, and the third thing is when people are lending, so not bonds but direct bilateral lending. All of these, the risk factors that they look at for the purposes of lending are also a lot rooted in ESG. So therefore, they want to know what the environmental impact will be, not just of the particular company, but also of the vendors of that company. At the end of the day, reputation risk also is going to increase the risk premium of lending. So therefore, all of these factors are coming in from a broader, capital markets perspective. If you sort of go closer to home, there is the BRSR, the top, top X number of companies are supposed to mandatorily, report BRSR from this year. Even when it was voluntary, which was last year, we found about 150 odd companies actually reporting. We tried to put out guidance, it's available on our website as well, where we've actually put out 38 subsectors, essentially to help the much smaller companies. The larger companies have a lot of advisors that will tell them how to do something or how to measure it and so on. We tried to put out something in the public domain which will help the middle and smaller companies to actually evaluate, because at this point in time it's just for the top X number of companies. You don't need to go down the chain. But the point was that let us start encouraging people to look at ESG, whether or not it applies to you mandatorily. Let us start looking at ESG in a different way. It doesn't matter what the size of your company is. So that's something which, which as exchanges, over and above our regulatory role, we would like to do and encourage. This picture is actually shows you two sides. I found it on the internet, so not developed by NSE. One is India on the left, on one side total carbon emissions by nation, and therefore if you look at the absolute numbers, India is the big toe. But on the right side, if you actually look, because that's per capita, you will not find it. I needed a full-fledged magnifying glass to find India. I don't even know whether I can see it from here. But I thought it was a very interesting picture on sustainability because we are having so many conversations on it. Thought I'd just show it to you. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Priya. I think the key message from you is fundamentally that if not the regulators, actually investors are pushing. It's rewarding for companies. You've seen it happen in the market cap. And you're saying beyond that, even the debt funding is going to shift towards what impact you're having. And you sort of left it a little bit easy in the sense that let us at least start reporting, and BRSR is a framework. But I'm sure even as we look at this map, and I'm sort of going to connect that to what Oksana has been saying, in the sense that you look at India as a small dot, and on an absolute term, it does look bigger. Obviously, all these elements are contextual. And while let's start reporting looks like an easy invitation, and there's a tough battle out there for medium, small, and so many of them. So I don't know your thoughts on this, Oksana, because you've worked with many firms of which are different size, different context.
Thank you, Mr. Mukundan. So definitely, the corporate world is under pressure. We have to, the corporate world have to show how they comply with ESG principles, and we have a lot of framework, etc. And actually, the profitability and success of big companies depends a lot because they want, by doing good, by complying with all of this, corporation wants to mitigate risk of the reputation being spoiled, etc., etc. But to be honest, big companies have resources to play in those games. It doesn't matter whether CEOs personally believe that they have to do this. It doesn't matter whether CEOs want to make this world a better place to live. All these things that don't matter for them, they have to do this. When it comes to small and medium companies, it's not that obvious, and India has done a great job by introducing compulsory CSR regulations. So there are many companies. I came from corporate world. I know how huge the struggle is to make CSR budget to reconcile with a board. So companies in India don't have to do this. But we have another problem that smaller companies have to understand actually for what they are doing this. And to be honest, non-financial reporting standards don't always, don't necessarily help to understand what kind of profit can be gained by making this world a better place to live. Because of when it comes to smaller businesses, there are so many challenges which needed to be solved. So, and here, particularly in terms of social aspect, I would like to talk about necessity to develop the right set of metrics, metrics which can measure the CSR projects, the profit for the company, which does actually CSR, which invests into CSR. And those metrics cannot measure abstract things like, I don't know, carbon footprint, etc. The result is not obvious for the company smaller than huge corporation. So those metrics can actually show the link between CSR expenditure and profitability first, and it can be shown. Those metrics have to show the link between loyalty of major stakeholders and how this loyalty due to CSR expenditure can benefit actually the company's business. And also, when we are talking about CSR expenditures in a sector of small medium entrepreneurship, we have to understand that the strategy of those companies is defined purely by personal vision of main shareholder, owner, etc. So, and those metrics can actually have to inspire this shareholder to invest in those things. And when it comes to Indian market, what I saw, and actually it was big surprise for me that perhaps due to cultural mindset, religion, many factors can influence that. But many companies have NGO, not just because of they want to manipulate CSR reporting, but also just because of they were able to develop programs which affect communities here now, not in a 5 or 10 years perspective. And I believe when we are doing CSR, or when we are trying to comply with ESG, we have to provide some sort of education for those companies which are smaller, so they can understand how it will contribute their business while making this world a better place to live.
Thank you. I think the point which you make about measuring impact and being relevant in the impact, I think is a very important piece which really, including in CSR programs. And I think those communities will value it more. The company will see a lot of positive benefits of doing this. That brings me to Jayant, to you, because you work with companies at the micro level, not at the conceptual level we started with, Anjanani. Both are needed. We need that. But then even he said we need to go down to the critical pathway to get the job done. So your thoughts on how can companies which are beyond the big ones, which may have all the resources, and what are the opportunities available to them in terms of moving in this direction?
Thank you. We work on the front line, the shop floor Gemba, as we say it, and very often people ask me all these frameworks, these policies, concepts, very daunting. So what does it really mean to me? This is a typical question that we are asked. So I'm going to be very simple, very quick. One is, we say the way to understand governance, rule number one, is share data. Be transparent internally and externally. And externally, some data has to be given. It's a must. But internally, very often doesn't happen. So we always say rule number 101 of good governance is to start sharing data. And we call it, in our terminology, we call it daily management. So, share daily, meet daily, review this, and keep reflecting what's happening. I think this has to happen at all levels, top, middle, and going down all the way. So unless you start sharing data, people don't care, they don't understand, they don't question. So I think that's number one. The first rule of governance is to start sharing data. I'm going to touch very quickly about sustainability, green, and we say that what we need to do is what we call as realize, minimize, and neutralize. So look at all the hazards, whether it's air, water, a non-biodegradable material, energy. First is to realize what is the consumption, what is the waste. If you don't realize, you can't minimize. If you don't minimize, sometimes you can't minimize, then you neutralize. So we give them very simple action points. So just to wind up, one is to start sharing at all levels, both externally and internally. Start with internal sharing. External, you have to do it, otherwise you'll be in trouble. But internally, many times we don't do it. And when it comes to anything about sustainability, we say, please start with realize, then go into minimize, and if you can't minimize, try and neutralize. So this is how we deal with this at a very granular level. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. That reminds me of what we were trying to do 15 years ago when we started this thing. It was very nascent at that time, carbon and all, and I tried to sort of go to my factory and explain. And the workforce, which is skilled and semi-skilled, they couldn't get it. So finally we changed to say, let's save energy and let's put that on the dashboard. And that really drove the realization. Then somehow we converted that to saying that we have a coal-fired boiler. This energy saving means I put less coal. Somewhere I think that started to build. But I think you got to start with what they can tangibly feel, and really very important point. And your point about realize, minimize, neutralize is a very good mantra for many of us to take home, especially when it comes to the point about environment impact. But at the same time, if you were to go to Oksana's statement, she will say maximize impact. She will use the other exact opposite in her term. So over to you, Anjali. I think one of the things you mentioned was technology and innovation. I think technology innovation can also play a big role in terms of accelerating the direction. It also can make the transparency much more easy, and there's all this issue of, companies want to look good. You have any thoughts on what are the various technologies companies can deploy in this road towards being environmentally sustainable, socially relevant, and be best in governance?
Yeah, I think just before that, I think I was struck by the discussion in terms of saying, Priya talked about the fact that there has to be a push from the regulator, from investors, and at the same time she also talked about there is a pull because if you're more sustainable, funding is sometimes easy. The cost of raising funds is easier. Sometimes it's easier to employ more talented people. So I think there is an element of both push and pull. And I think there is a need to advertise and market a lot more of the benefits of organizations and small organizations here. I think the larger organizations, because of resources, because of talent, because of technology, are probably a little more sorted in this group since we're discussing SMEs. I think one of the questions I've always been struck with is, as an SME, as a startup, do I even need to think about ESG? Can I not do it when I become bigger? Can I scale up? But I think my response is actually always the opposite. In a startup or in a small organization, your ability to reduce regulatory intervention, to reduce cost of capital, to increase productivity, to increase your market share, actually becomes far higher if you're more ESG compliant from day one. And it's also easier for you to build your processes and people from day one rather than scaling up and then doing a retrofitting, which a lot of big corporates are doing, which is breaking down processes, trying to think things, ab initio. So, I think that's one of the things I wanted to share as we were doing this discussion. But I think back to your point, I think we are in some senses privileged to live in this era when, because of technology, a lot of the problems can be solved. So for example, if you look at some of the Industry 4.0 technologies like sensorization, now some of the organizations can clearly at a very granular level measure the emissions, measure changes, and keeping all the parameters the same. If I just make change to one parameter, what happens to the emission? I think if you go back 10, 15 years back, it was very difficult and you just had to do trial and error. But now because of sensors, it's become far easier. Secondly, the cost of storage has come down drastically. So our ability to do simulations, to be able to create digital twins of our organizations or our factories or our supply chains, and with tinkering of certain parameters, see what impact it has on carbon emissions, is also a very relatively cheaper way of doing it rather than actually doing it in the physical field. So I think that's a second technology intervention that's helping us move towards carbon reduction. And I think the third is clearly from an analytics perspective, our ability to predict what could happen if we make certain changes is again something which is new on the table and really, really very helpful. And as generative AI has shown, the opportunities are just immense. So some of those will further develop. And again, going back to the smaller organizations, hopefully the cost of implementing technology and getting to these solutions will become cheaper for them. It has been a little bit of a barrier for them. They necessarily haven't had access to technology, but with some of the SaaS models, some of the cheaper technologies, some of the startups, I'm hoping things will change in a much more positive manner.
We can see that, Nadi. I think the point you make about that now the models don't need huge capital upfront investment, but can be pay as you use. And we've seen small companies actually implement and actually use much better than bigger companies because the person who's getting impacted is actually the owner of the business, and he or she can see the impact of that. That brings me to taking on another aspect which we don't discuss often in our one is innovation. Other one, Oksana, coming to you, is on this diversity, equity, inclusion, which is again a big area which I did not touch upon in my opening comments, and maybe that has a big role in the whole ESG, right? We speak about ESG, but then when you come to at least my observation of where Indian companies stand, I think we have a long way to go in that direction. I think your thoughts on that?
With diversity, equality, and inclusion, you know, I have in mind very interesting example. We often discuss gender pay gap and all these things. And you know, while diversity is very important, and it shall all start with something, for instance, like regulation on requirement of certain representative in the board, but perhaps women will support me. We don't want to be in a board just because of our company want to comply with that regulation. We want to be fairly selected based on our merit, right? So, and since I'm originally Russian, and Russia has the highest percent of female representation, but it's not like just because of in Russia it was an agenda or some sort of fashion or government tried, actually implemented some huge effort. No, it's just because of Soviet Union and all these socialistic ideas. You know, Soviet Union emerged from very hard time, and the government wanted to reach economic growth quite fast, so it was almost gender-neutral country. Just because of we didn't have men and women, we had Soviet citizens called Tavarish, which all have to contribute to economic growth. And actually, the Soviet Union was first to send women to the space, and then it sent to the space first black person, from Cuba, if I'm not mistaken, from first Asian. It was a guy, gentleman, sorry, from Vietnam, because of it was friendly country. And actually Soviet Union started to do things before the world, before it came so fashionable. And basically it was done just because of, partly because of propaganda. First woman in a space wasn't trained as cosmonaut. She was from very poor, simple background, and it served perfectly propaganda aims. But also because of merit, that girl, Valentina Tereshkova, qualified in terms of many things like health, etc. She showed very good examples after all exams, etc. So, and when we come to diversity and inclusion, obviously we have to have in place some certain regulations which support our good intentions to achieve diverse board, etc., etc. But also we shall not forget about logic behind all these things. And also, you know, the friend of mine used to work in a team of YouTube when they were trying to introduce mobile version of YouTube. And I remember this is a story that how they came up with the idea to introduce to mobile version of YouTube, because of they used to live in the US and they didn't understand back then why it's needed. But actually one guy in a team from India said that Indian people don't have computers, that's why they cannot access YouTube. And another guy said that, you know, Indian people don't have iPhones, they have Android, so we need to develop Android version for that mobile version in order to reach the biggest, one of the biggest market in the world. So when we understand this, that diversity and inclusion, when we secure their existence within our business, was implemented in a right, logical way, and we apply merit-based approach, actually it will benefit our business a lot, and it will push away all companies from that idea. If we want to, if we will try to put women, black person, Asian person, whatever, in a board just because of we need to comply with the regulation, or the same thing, you know, somebody can do things just because of They don't want to be criticized another small girl activist like Greta, but it's not right motivation to do this. And coming to small and medium business entrepreneurship, since they much busier than us sometimes because they don't have so many people to serve them, we need to educate them. We need to educate them about all advantages, which those ideas we like to discuss at nice summits like this, that those ideas can benefit them, their families, and their businesses here and now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this point about how inclusion expands the market, expands the impact, I think is a very powerful one, especially the one in YouTube, and hope the message goes across. And the point about what you make in terms of merit-based, it is not just because somebody, I think it was a message which I got because every year we celebrate the Women's Day, and then that day there are special addresses by CEOs who go out and meet, which they should do anyway every day, but then the message which comes across back is it should be on merit. It's not, and they don't want it any other way. And I remember when I was first started to sort of have more women in the company, and the place which first some lady put up her hand and said, I want to be in sales and marketing. I said, fine, you be in marketing. She said, no, I want to be in sales. I said, how do you start out in sales? So we sent her to a very, let's say, south of India, thinking that it'll be safe for her. And then, so she called me one day and says, I want to ask you one question. Why am I being given these urban routes in Bangalore? Why not rural India? So that sort of sent a message that they want to be equal and want to be counted, and we have to work towards this whole process of inclusion. Very important piece in ESG, which we forget many times. Going back to this whole piece, Priya, to you, in terms of the reporting disclosure standards, you just said you want a basic regulatory framework is to nudge them. But what is your view on state of affair of ESG reporting in India? And more so, can you add a second piece to it? This is what we pick up from, while we talk nice things in conferences like this, but also a lot of people say, you only like to disclose to companies like us, you like to disclose only good things about yourself. How do we know where the real balance is? What are your thoughts on, which people call as greenwashing? What's your thoughts on that?
So I think Jayant already said that about greenwashing. Now, one is to use English, the other is to use data. So the only way that you're going to be, the only way that you're going to convince people is actually to use data and metrics. And sometimes I look at annual reports, and this is not exactly the question that you asked. But if the first 50 pages or 60 pages are about, which hospital you opened and what you did for society, I think you should think about that company in a very different way. So data is exceedingly important from a greenwashing perspective. Yes, there are issues with we are not the experts. Companies necessarily need to depend on people providing indices, people providing a lot of expert advice. And sometimes that advice is not necessarily tailored to that particular company. And then you end up finding, one size fits all approach, and therefore, then there are some accusations of greenwashing and so on. That might be absolutely inadvertent, actually. It may not be something that the company wants to deliberately do. It just doesn't have the right tools to measure itself. But whatever, in terms of the broader transparency, I think data, putting out every piece of data that you measured yourself on, I think will give that much more comfort to everybody, including the regulators and investors. Insofar as, the larger companies are the ones that have to mandatorily report, the top 1,000 companies, and therefore what we see is they have enough help. The people that did report to us last year on a voluntary basis, again, the reporting was fairly decent. I would not say that there was a lot there were a lot of gaps. Be that as it may, I think it's frankly very evolving. And therefore, it's going to take time for people to adjust to the fact that a lot of this would necessarily need to be put out in a way that's measurable and comparable, because otherwise what are you going to do with that data? Data by itself has no meaning. So therefore, I think we are going to evolve over a period of time to get to a point where, again, BRSR will, in a way, sort of make certain things uniform. But be that as it may, each industry is very different in terms of, so therefore, While we may have a basic standard, each industry will evolve by itself and get to a point where you can give all your stakeholders a lot more information about the state of play.
Thank you. I think the message from you is, if I were to sum it up, disclosure is not transparency. I think that is the underlying theme, and really companies have to graduate to the level of being transparent, not just disclosure-led, but that's a starting point. To you, Jayant, I think when you explained that you work with companies at the Gemba micro level, how do you sort of work with them on ESG in the core operations? What are the things you do? Because that's where the rubber hits the road. And what are the key enablers to get it going at that level?
Thank you. Let me talk about the E part of it, environmental. So we talk about make it very simple for them, we talk about 5 hazards. So we say that along your business, along the value stream, we do something called a green value stream mapping. It's a big English word, it's very simple. From the time you get an order till you get cash, or from the time the material enters the system and it goes out as a finished good. Let's map 5 hazards. Use of non-renewable energy. Are you wasting energy? Especially if it's coming from a solar panel, please waste it. No problem. But if it's coming from a coal-fired plant, we can't waste it. So this is the simple message we give them. Second is water. How much you pollute, how much you consume, measure it, realize. Third is use of non-biodegradable material like plastic for packaging, etc., or wood. You should not be using it. The fourth is air. How much are you polluting? And the fifth is ecological damage in your value chain. Are you having anything that kills the flora and fauna? So first is we are trying to make them realize about these 5 hazards. Make it very simple for them. So measure it. Once you start realizing it, the second step is, can we do something to minimize it? So that is improvement, right? So you try to make small improvements. And the first rule, I'll just be very short, is try to improve without investment. There's a lot of things you can do without investment. If you tell them that you have to change your boiler, they'll say, sir, wo nahi hoga, sir. So the whole spirit of Kaizen is to how do you improve without adding? How do you improve by deleting? So these are the simple things we tell them, and to better utilize what is already available. So that is minimize. And sometimes if you can't do it, then maybe you offset by planting trees or certain things. So unless you demystify it, people, I'll tell you, the smaller and medium industries, they are lost in all this jargon. So we have to demystify it and give them actions to take. And I believe 2 things implemented is better than 100 ideas and a report and whatever you call it. So that's our take on granularity, focus on actions, and not just get caught in a lot of jargons. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayant. I've seen many examples of this, and really this is something you can take home, that not everything which is needed in ESG is going to cost money. In fact, many of them will end up saving you money and will be net profit earner for all of us. So this is the time which is going to come between your mind and the stomach. So you can ask as many questions as you want, depending on what the pressure on the other side is. So it's over to the audience, and just raise your hand, and the mic will come to you. And also, if it's directed to specifically someone, please direct it to the person. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Wilfred Montiero, Management Consultant and Independent Director. Now, what hit me in this program was the DEI, since one of my portfolios is Human Resource Management. Internationally, especially USA, they have got what is called an equal opportunity employer. Even the semblance of that law is not anywhere in India. And if I was to hold a quiz contest among HR professionals, 9 out of 10 would fail. But the spirit of equal opportunity employer I have tried to implement, not just cosmetic gender equality, but in India, special problems which are there of equality and inclusion, casteism, regionalism, communalism, which work against people being recruited only on merit and because of extraneous considerations. So what I try to do in my consulting assignment, what Jayanta said, granulize it Kaizen way, since I studied a little of Kaizen. And I said, build better governance in your recruitment system. Train people so that there is more professionalism and transparency in the recruitment system, and automatically you address the big issue of DEI. And thereby, whatever you say, governance, etc.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Oksana, if you have anything further to add, or...
Thank you, sir, for the comment. You know, I have a few examples when actually the requirements of to have certain groups within the company benefited business a lot, just because of the owners didn't understand before the value of having those people within the business. But at the same time, sometimes it can spoil the business as well. So may I argue that sometimes merit-based approach can be applied even to those you hire for the company and will train, because you won't hire people to train within the company if they are not capable, and you can see this, but they comply with your with your necessity or need to have certain groups of people. You understand what I mean? So I believe that merit shall be there. We are not the same. We are equal in terms of our rights, etc., but we are not the same. And so we can contribute in our own way. It's just my comment.
Yeah, I had a quick comment. You see, I was talking to a company, a business in Dharwad, in Karnataka. And he was saying, sir, what is this ESG? So I was trying to, in my own small way, social. So he said, after understanding, he said, sir, from decades, we've always given food, like free lunch to our employees. We have done a lot of things around the factory for our villages. He says, ye to abhi baat kar rahe hain, if those of you understand this. So the point I'm trying to say is, while ESG in a way is emerging, it's fashionable, quote unquote, I think there's a lot of things Indians have been doing for decades and centuries as responsible corporates. So let us not always operate from guilt and say that we have to do something tomorrow. I think there's a lot of good we are already doing under these three terms of E, S, and G. This is my 2 bits. Thank you.
Quick comment. You have to go to the next question.
Just one, I think, very valid point. But see, there's another way to look at it. It's not we are doing inclusion, diversity, because somebody is asking us to do. The way you look at, and I'll talk from a management consulting perspective, because you come from there. The kinds of problems our clients are having to solve, you can't solve them with having people with one background. Historically, if you look at management consulting, there's a lot of engineer MBAs. But problem statements of clients, and because of industries merging, it's not, in a pigeonhole like it's an engineering problem, it's a design problem. They're all coming together. The industries are coming together. So just for us to be able to do things, we just need that diversity. We need diversity of thought, diversity of education, diversity of background, because people just get very different perspectives to the workplace. So I think it's over and beyond somebody mandating it. It just helps you do better. I think that's been my experience.
Thank you. Over to you, sir. I think while you get the mic, I just want to say that think a bit about equality is not equity. Huh? So what are we striving for? I leave that question, but okay. Over to you.
Yeah. My question about how corporate governance works for employers' fitness and wellness area, because finally that is very important. What kind of the employees change a new style of life. There are a lot of practicing in which is also impacted to the world also, that we're best practicing. So because any healthy capital, human capital required to run. So it's not about only for fitness, wellness, but how it's also integrated with the society. So what kind of practicing, in a corporate governance can be motivate employers.
Is there a metric, Priya, in terms of employee wellness in PRSR, and how do you bring that element in?
So there are clearly certain metrics about what you're doing. So all the three, ES and G, are covered. But the broader perspective, frankly, is that if you're not having employees so if you're not taking care of the mental wellness of employees, they're just going to go away. I mean, we spoke in the morning a little about the fact that today the opportunities are very, very different. So, and younger people have no problem in sort of moving on to another company. So, and therefore the cost of recruiting and training is immense. It's not, and the cycle. So if I were to lose an employee today, the time taken for me to recruit a new employee and train the new employee is probably, is not going to be less than 8 months. Therefore, I'm losing productivity. And the people that are, you also have a situation where somebody else is doing their day job plus training somebody else. So the entire cycle. So the simple profitability motive, I think, will drive people towards, making sure that their employees' wellness needs are taken care of. I think that's probably, part of Tata's ethos as well.
While the mic goes to the lady there, I just wanted to tell each one of you, we will close the session with me inviting one word, ESG and business. What comes to your mind? Okay, just think of that word. Each one of you, 4 words. Over to you.
This is Charmi Shah. I'm a chartered accountant. I just wanted to know how would be a tracking and monitoring of sustainability in insurance company work?
I don't have a direct answer to that, honestly. Because,
Insurance companies, what are the key metrics to track their sustainability? I think it's very specific to the sector.
I honestly don't have an answer.
You have an answer, Andani?
Yeah, I think, see, and if I can extrapolate insurance companies to the services industry, I think from an E perspective, the largest, the largest contributor is travel, as well as electricity in the premises that you're in, right? So those are, for services companies, largest contributor to ESG from a E perspective. I think from a social and governance, I think they're fairly similar to what you would see. All the metrics that you would have in the RSR would be similar on the social and governance. So I wouldn't say insurance companies would have anything very different.
So are there any tools, any tools available to track the data for this, or we have to find through our sources?
Actually, we put out certain metrics on the NSE website. You can give me your listing and your details, and I will send that to you. So you will find near equal, companies that are near equal, and therefore you can look at those metrics, and those also have not just the BRSR, but also what other sustainability metrics globally provide for. And therefore, you can look at everything in its look at it all together, and then decide what is the best metric for you to actually measure yourself and report. So it's out on the NSE website, but I can give it to you separately as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
So last 2 questions, you, and then, okay, last 3 questions. We'll just sort of stick to 1, 2, and 3, yeah? Quickly.
Yeah. Hello and good afternoon, and thank you and for your time and insights. I had a question. My name is Shalvi. I work as an ESG analyst, and my question was related to the environment part. When Ms. Oksana said that big companies have resources to make the world a better place, and you showed us this diagram of total consumption, total carbon footprint, and per capita carbon footprint. So in that context, I wanted to ask that now in ESG reporting, companies have these forward-looking targets that, by so-and-so year, we'll achieve net zero. But is there any sort of, say, historical accountability when it comes to the carbon pie that they've already consumed, especially big companies? Is there any sort of a conversation or even intent to include this aspect into ESG? Thank
Hold
you.
that thought. Let's go through all the questions. So you're going to answer that question, okay?
Hello, sir. Thank you very much for a very wonderful session elaborating on the multiple nuances. Abraham Lincoln, sir, has said the future of a country lies in the classroom. So, what is your good sir perspective pertaining to academy-industry collaboration in such a critical subject, sir?
Someone to comment on academy-industry collaboration. And last one, yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Ayushi Joshi. I'm part of in-house legal team of BASF India Limited. So my question is, since ESG as a concept will have different implication on different industry, how can one set strategy or standards within an organization? And a second question to that is, can we expect a statute regarding ESG coming up in India?
So statute, and how do you set strategy for, and then academy and industry. So first one you were reaching to go, yeah.
Yeah, I think the first question in terms of what do you do about carbon emissions in the past, at least one company I know of is Microsoft. They have committed to not just net zero, but they have actually said carbon negative. So what they have committed is, I think by 2030 or 2035, all the carbon that they have emitted since their founding in 1975, cumulatively they will give back. So I'm at least aware of only, the net zero commitments that company makes is in that year, right? So we will be neutral in that year. Microsoft, I know, or maybe that's the only company I know which have said cumulatively it'll be carbon negative. I think on the academia corporate work, I think that's very critical. And I'm seeing a lot of that happening in India because some of the ideas, some of the frameworks, some of the intellectual thinking that academia can bring in, corporates typically miss out, because it's here and now, it's looking at short-term measures, it's looking at the next quarter performance. So clearly, I think all the work in, whether we need incentives for it or whether it'll just work naturally, it's a little early to say, but I think it's really critical, and I've seen some green shoots, at least.
Anyone wants to speak about strategy, for differing sectors? How can you apply strategy on?
I think to add on the academia part, engineering institutes run their own incubators, and the technology, a lot of the technology technology needs to become cheaper. It has become cheaper over a period of time. I think the academia collaboration there, from a development of technology perspective, is in fact very, very critical. Most of the large IITs, as I think most of us would be aware, run a lot of incubators, and there the technologies that you can experiment with and then sort of bring to market, is that collaboration, I think, is exceedingly important. In terms of the regulation per se, R.A.I.S.E is our statute. There is going to be no regulation which is going to be able to tell anybody that this is exactly what you need to do. I mean, certain and therefore comparability and reporting and comparability is a challenge, especially in non-financial kind of metrics. But I think we will evolve. There will be more guidance as we go forward. And the world has also evolved. In fact, different standards are coming together to create one single standards board with exactly this, so that different people don't go off doing different things, and then there is no comparison.
You wanted to say something, Oksana?
Yeah, I would like to comment on the one strategy for different industries. I don't believe that it's possible. If the company wants to just to comply with regulations, yes, as Mr. Priya and all we discussed, there are different standards of non-financial reporting, and usually company trying to apply different parts of those frameworks for different parts of their businesses, etc. But it's not possible. You have to adapt. In order to make ESG and all this compliance meaningful for your company, you have to customize those frameworks to the needs of your business, to the groups of your stakeholders, and actually the things which you believe the important in your particular industry. So perhaps it's a matter to think, and world is trying to develop new united standards, but I believe it's like wishful thinking.
Thank you. So we're going to end with quick one word which comes to your mind: ESG and business.
I would say imperative.
Imperative. Over to you, Oksana. What is that one word which comes to your mind?
Beneficial for the business.
Long-lasting.
Long-lasting.
Demystify.
Oh, demystify. So on the word of demystifying, we're going to sort of end this session. Thank you all for a wonderful session, and give a round of applause to wonderful panelists. And over to CII to take this forward. Next. Yeah, I think while
CI comes and takes the stage, I think you can go. One of the questions, I am Sangeeta Shetty from Aditya Birla Sun Life Insurance. I am the company secretary. So with respect to insurance business or any financial services business, the focus is mainly on the products that the insurance companies sell. It should be towards the low income groups, towards the women employees, and towards the rural section. Also, the investments that is done by an insurance company, those should be directed towards ESG compliant companies. So this is how the ESG in insurance companies are monitored. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our speakers for their insightful deliberations. And now we are starting the lunch, so please join us for lunch. And the next session will start at 2:30. So kindly be seated back by 2:30. Thank you.